Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, my name is Julie, and I mostly make videos surrounding topics such as music, makeup, as well as mental health. I'm a former therapist, I'm autistic and non-binary, and if you're curious, my pronouns are they/them. For today, we are going to casually review a new album. So since I haven't had Twitter in a long time, I am almost never up to date with album releases. I don't obsessively follow them, and I deal with so much sensory overload, I don't always have the time or spoons to even check out music in the first place. However, now that I'm not working, I did today. And I didn't plan to do this album review. I saw tricklings that the album was out. I didn't know when it came out. I know I had heard a couple singles before. I listened to the album I'm going to be reviewing today while coloring, and it blew my mind, and I felt inspired. I felt inspired to make a video. So today we are going to be talking about the album Decay by the band The Devil Wears Prada. So I would assume most people watching my channel know who The Devil Wears Prada are. They've been a band for many years. In fact, after I listened to this album, I was listening to Outnumbered just to get into my old school The Devil Wears Prada vibes, and it felt so good. With Roots Above and Branches Below is one of my favorite albums of all time. It's probably in my top 10 to 15 favorite albums of all time. It's not just my favorite Scene Kid album, it's one of my favorite metalcore albums in general. And what I love about The Devil Wears Prada is their ability to blend so much into their music. You never know if you're getting a heavy song, a soft song, an acoustic song, or a blend of everything in one friggin' song, and they will make it happen. And I feel that they really stuck to that in this album, Decay. So Decay is a 44.5-minute long album. It was released this past Friday, which was September 16th of 2022. There are 12 total tracks on the album. I'm not going to go track by track and talk about everything individually. I think it's probably better if I talk about what tracks stand out to me and just reflect on my overall experience listening to that album. Just a disclaimer, I'm no professional music critic. I'm not Anthony Fantano. I'm not John from ARTV. I'm just Jules. I'm a music fan. I like this band. I wouldn't want to make a review talking about a band I didn't like and just, crapping all over them. Obviously, I love The Devil Wears Prada. Just to get that out of the way, I'm not going to be able to talk about all these intricate stylistic things. I'm just going to say what I like. Exhibition didn't do it for me. Mind you, I've only listened to this album once. This isn't a negative thing. I have to go back and listen to the album and have more of an appreciation for the album overall. So now we're on the song Salt. I love that it just opens with a verse that says, I can never process what I'm feeling in my bones. And I think this is a theme of the album overall, that there's a lot of mental health oriented themes and things that I think a lot of people think and feel, but are terrified to say. And in these times, it makes sense why we'd be terrified to say a lot of things. I am proud of The Devil Wears Prada for using their voice to say things like this. The way I interpret a line like, I can never process what I'm feeling in my bones, essentially is, it's really hard to match our body and mind. They go together. Our body gives us a lot of signals about how we're feeling and thinking, but we tend to try to go into our mind instead of listening to our body. And that leads to a lot of disconnect and difficulties for people. I could go on a whole rant that neurodivergent people struggle with alexithymia, where it's hard for them to identify emotions in the first place. But we obviously know outside of neurodivergence, people with trauma, which is pretty much all of us at this point, have a really hard time identifying what's going on. There might be a block to processing. The nervous system might not be ready to process what's happening in the body, and that might be a sort of protective layer for whatever memory is going on with, whoever this song is supposed to be focused on. Just that line alone was you're starting with this intensive mental health oriented line. So that's when my, autistic mental health spin focus brain was like, yes, I like this song. I want to hear what they're talking about. And they're talking about a sickness that I can't diagnose. That whole first verse is just yeah, a lot of people struggle with what's going on with me. I can't even imagine how I'm thinking and feeling and what's happening, let alone what diagnosis is this? Is this a medical problem? Is it a mental health condition? And we've pathologized so much with our big purple book, our DSM. People do tend to get lost in this a lot of the time, and diagnosis is important for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, and there's controversy around that. But I do think that this song, just in that first part alone, already brought it. I think it was really a catchy and well done song, and so my attention was definitely tuned into the album already by song 2, and I was really excited to see what else was going to happen as I continued listening. We're on to track 4, which is Noise. I was sharing this to my Instagram story earlier because the unclean screams, whatever you want to call them, really got to me on this song because they reminded me of the old Devil Wears Prada, which I thought I would never hear in their newer music. Mind you, I haven't been all too caught up with their newer music, but this album definitely caught my eye. So again, we have the beginning of a song. What if I missed a sign again? So often too insecure, thrown off by the noise again, like a vision now a blur. While I was saying that and while I was talking, I heard a distant noise outside. And this isn't the case for all autistics or people with sensory issues, but my worst sensory sensitivity is noise. Jules had a nice outburst for themselves while filming this video. My apologies. The noise went away. It was an airplane. I like playing the game of, is it an airplane or a lawnmower? So going back to read this lyric, as someone with massive sensory sensitivities, especially specifically to noise, I am almost always thrown off by noise. It really distracts me. It's hard for me to focus. I easily get sensory overload or have panic attacks or meltdowns if there's too much noise and I don't have ear protection. And it's a really debilitating thing to deal with. But yet again, they're talking about it in this song and saying, I could have missed a sign because I just get so easily thrown off by all of this noise, right? What if I missed some sort of sign? And again, I believe Devil Wears Prada, correct me if I'm wrong, was a Christian metalcore band. So maybe there is some religious belief in this, but I don't want to speak for them because I don't have evidence of what all these lyrics mean. But that's the fun part about lyricism, that we can sit here and say, what does this mean to me? How does this song impact who I am and how I move through the world? So for me specifically, I definitely relate to feeling insecure and feeling like I missed something along the way. And I was just talking about this with my therapist today, and she noticed in my dialogue I was saying I should have known I was autistic then, I should have known this then, and then I never would have got hurt and these things wouldn't have happened to me. And I think that when we have trauma, it's really hard to not feel insecure, not even about who we are now, but who we were at other periods of our life, and especially when we lack various parts of our self-awareness that could have kept us safe. And I think that that's a huge piece of noise sensitivity for me, is it disrupts my established sense of safety. And it makes it really hard to focus and see other details in life that are more safety oriented. I just thought not only were the lyrics in this song really powerful in general that I'm reading over right now, but I also felt that the actual screams were just so breathtaking. I was like, a song about noise and how it affects things, and then we also have old Devil Wears Prada in a song, this is so exciting. So I was very, very happy with that, and that song stood out to me a lot. I know Broken was one of the main singles, and I definitely like it. And again, these first verses are just I keep reading them and going, dang, they don't even wait to get into things. They're just here you go. So verse 1 of Broken says, I hate when I get left alone. I'm sure that all these calls are getting old. A short drive, just get me home. The cost is nowhere near to what I owe. Sounds like someone who's enduring some kind of rejection. And again, I'm allowed to be wrong. Yay! But in my reading that, it sounds like this person in the song wants someone that doesn't want them back. And that they feel really regretful of, a past relationship of some sort with someone. And it's really sad that there's a line in the pre-chorus that says, I'm a lost cause with nothing left, can't you see that? I think there's a lot of different emotions when you listen to this album, but they really depict shame in an accurate way. I feel like there's a lot of lyrics around just feeling ashamed for not only what you've done, but who you are. And that's the distinct difference between the emotions of guilt and shame. I'm doing therapist psycho ed here, but guilt is when we feel bad about something we did. Shame is when we think we're a bad person because of things that we did or things that we experience or parts of who we are or are really anything. And shame's a really difficult and unbearable emotion for a lot of people to sit with, myself included. And so for these lyrics to be in here, it's very emo core central to have such heavy lyricism, but it also is really important for mental health awareness to be discussing these topics. And, you know, I think this song was really catchy and somber and just sad in general, but it definitely depicted shame in a really accurate way. I was going through the songs again to jolt my memory. So the song Trapped, the vocals in this remind me of the lead singer of Touche Amore. Did anyone else feel that way? Just the overall vibe of the song reminded me a lot specifically of that band. So it's interesting because the Devil Wears Prada is this metalcore band, right? But that doesn't mean that they have to like fit into a box. They can dabble into like hardcore and post-hardcore subgenres because the genres are kind of all interrelated. So, you know, I'm not even gonna talk about the lyricism here because I do think it's fairly similar to other songs, like a difficult relationship and feeling shame for that and regret, but still trying to repair with the person. And yes, this could be a higher power if it's religious, but I'm not exactly sure. Moving on from that, the last two songs on this album, I was blown away. So I'm looking at the lyrics for Hallucinate now, talking about what's real, what's fake. I've been forced into the depths of agony, frozen in sickness, no one beside me, can't find the painkiller, can't numb the ache. Years washed away. I mean, this song discussing numbness in such an extensive way speaks a lot to our freeze response or dissociation, which is another part of trauma for a lot of people. But even if it's not PTSD related, dissociation exists on a spectrum. So even someone kind of zoning out can be a form of dissociation. But anyways, I think that this song is really powerful because it speaks to, you know, the artist on this album or whoever it is has been in so much pain throughout the whole album. And now they've been in so much pain, they realize there's years of their life with memories, some of them happy and exciting, that they just don't have anymore. And like I said, that's a hard part of trauma, that when we have trauma, it does tend to block out certain parts of our lives for our safety, for our protection, but it also tends to block out positive moments too if they're tied to trauma or in a certain time period where we endured extensive complex or developmental trauma. And that's a really hard thing to deal with. And I think for people who deal with a lot of numbness and dissociation, it's frustrating for them because it's hard to accept. It's one thing like if you're, okay, I'm going into this meeting, I'm nervous and I'm gonna dissociate to get through it, right? Like if you know the response is gonna come on and why, it makes sense and then you can accept it more. But like say you're having a good time hanging out with your friends and it happens out of nowhere, I mean, that's really like difficult and debilitating and anxiety inducing. And this was another thing I was talking about with my therapist today, because obviously I come in and out of dissociation a lot as someone with complex PTSD. But I think these are really important topics to talk about altogether, even if they're not using the clinical words of like trauma, PTSD, anxiety, depression, dissociation. Like they're still covering it in a way that people can understand what they're talking about. And I'm sure a lot of the Devil Wears Prada's listeners and fans have their own mental health difficulties. Again, who doesn't these days? So I think having music that is just this deep and heavy and isn't afraid to go there is so important. I mean, the ending of the song is talking about like being chained to a disease, and for some kind of relief, I would do anything. And it breaks my heart just like reading these lyrics, because as a former therapist, like, you know, people come to therapy because they want relief, they want to feel better. And the most heartbreaking thing that I had to say is, therapy is a lot of symptom management. It's about accepting and coping with the difficulties that you have. It's not always about making it go away. And of course, like, you want relief and you deserve to have relief and moments of relief, but life isn't always that relieving. And the goal of therapy isn't to make you happy and relieved and calm all the time. And I think that, you know, that lens on mental health adds to stigma around it. Well, if I'm not going to feel better, why wouldn't I go? Well, you know, you don't have to live your life feeling debilitated all the time, and therapy is a long-term process, but it can help you to feel better in the end. Lastly, I want to talk about the song Cancer, which is the last song in the album. So I think that this song is especially fascinating because there's a therapist, her name's Allegra Castens, her Instagram is Obsessively Ever After, and she's an OCD and eating disorder specialist, and she recently made a post on how at one point she wished that she had cancer or some illness that was easier to like explain to other people than OCD or a mental health condition. And she said in the caption, you know, this is really nuanced, this post is controversial, I'm not trying to say having cancer is easy or invalidating the lived experience of other people. She was trying to get the point across that mental health conditions are these invisible illnesses. There's not really always like blatant signs of them, especially when people are masking their symptoms and traits and difficulties. It's so hard to come to terms with, like, oh, oh great, something else is wrong with me. And that's the difficult part of diagnosis, because it does pathologize our experience. Like if you endure trauma, if you endure post-traumatic stress, it makes sense why you would want to protect yourself in the long term. But the DSM says something's wrong with you. If you worry about stuff all the time because life is hard and scary, oh, you got anxiety, generalized anxiety, something's wrong with you. And you know, it can be validating in a way to have a diagnosis, but in other ways, it can be really shame-inducing. And we know that the person on this album already has a lot of shame, but I just thought it was so interesting that Allegra recently brought up this whole conversation in mental health stigma in that community, and The Devil Wears Prada did too. Like, you know, because this is something so controversial to say. This isn't meant to, again, invalidate people with cancer. There were people on Allegra's post who were like, I have OCD and I have cancer, and I'm with you. I would rather have cancer. There are people who are like, I would rather have OCD, right? Like everyone's lived experience is valid and different. I don't think The Devil Wears Prada is trying to invalidate anyone's lived experience with any sort of illness or difficulty. Daily devastation that I can't validate. What's wrong with you? They'll ask about me. You're done. You're through. It's just like so sad, because it says, I hope that it's cancer and not something else, because I don't need any more things I don't want to talk about. And when it comes to mental health, it's not just that there's a stigma, it's that if we're present, we're not dissociated from how we think and feel and who we authentically are, and we're here, we're safe and social and mindful, and we just talk about our lived experience with trauma and we haven't healed our nervous system, that could be so destabilizing for someone to do and engage in. And I really think that's what this is about. It's not just like, oh, I don't want to talk about it because of, you know, toxic masculinity. Like, I don't think this line is all that simple. I think there's a lot of reasons why someone wouldn't be comfortable talking about struggling with their mental health, struggling with trauma and depression and dissociation and, you know, maybe a hard breakup or religious experience or whatever it is that someone is going through. It's not as simple as these mental health awareness movements, like it's okay to talk about it, or like I'm a safe person to talk to. Yeah, like that's great and all, like it's an important gesture and effort, sure. However, it's about why it's so hard for people to talk about these things, and it's really about that we all have these dysregulated nervous systems from trauma that we have to learn to heal, and we have to find communities to co-regulate in, and that can be really hard to do in the world that we live in now. There's a lot out there that does feel unsafe. It's not irrational to not feel safe, and it's about those moments where we can find safety. I just thought this album was beautiful. Instrumentally, like it covered everything. I love that there were like harder moments, softer moments, acoustic, piano, like drums, like everything. Everything was just going on in this album. I like the electronic parts because it reminds me of that like era with like Attack Attack and like Smokeahonis and like that kind of thing, even though The Devil Wears Prada is definitely not that. They still had some instrumentation that reminded me of that in some of the songs on the album, and I thought it was cool. You know, I also feel like this album is good for like fall vibes, Halloween vibes, because it's like sad and gloomy, but it's mental health focused. And I also felt like the album reminded me of Motionless in White, which I thought was really interesting. And then I thought, can Motionless in White and The Devil Wears Prada like link up and do some sort of cool like fall tour, because they both put out new music recently and that would be so cool. I mean, I loved the album within listening to it once. I didn't expect that I would, because like I said, I am someone who liked very, very old The Devil Wears Prada when I was in high school and kind of got stuck on that. And as an autistic person, I do get stuck on things and it's hard to branch out. But I am so glad I did. I'm so glad that I decided to just check out this album in color so I could really mindfully listen to it and take it all in. I think it's a really beautiful and wonderful, powerful, emotional album. So make sure that you have some self-care plugged into your day. If you're gonna check this album out, or if you have any, you know, triggers around talking about mental health, it's okay to take pauses and take your time with it. But I highly recommend checking this album out for a unique emotional experience. There were parts of the album that made me tear up that I related to, and parts that I was very curious about and like wanted to listen in and hear more. And that's exactly what you look for from an album. You really want it to draw you in and make the listener be interested for the whole time. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel as well, and I will catch you on the flip side. Bye all.